His ears go first, then the hands, then the legs, cramping, buckling in less than 20 minutes. And the man standing on the other side of the net, the man the whole world had decided was lazy, couldn't do a single thing. Not because he didn't care, because his own mind had declared war on him, and he'd spent 20 years letting the world believe the wrong story. This is the story Ernests Gulbis never told. Latvia, 1988. A billionaire's son is born into a world of art, literature, and theater. His parents, both obsessive book collectors, named him Ernest, after Hemingway. Not after a champion, not after an athlete, after a man who wrote about war, loss, and the dignity of those who endure. By 5 years old, he was already performing in front of cameras, acting alongside his mother, one of Latvia's most celebrated theater actresses. His grandfather, Uldis Pucītis, was one of the most beloved actors and directors in the country's history. The talent for performance, for commanding a room, for holding an audience, was in the blood. But there was something else in the blood too, something quieter, more dangerous. A mind that never stopped, that read Dostoevsky and Murakami in hotel rooms while his rivals studied match footage, that looked at the world of professional tennis and saw, with uncomfortable clarity, exactly what it was and exactly what it wasn't. At 12, his family made a decision that would shape everything. Ernests would leave Latvia to train at Niki Pilic's academy in Munich, alone, in a foreign country, at 12 years old. He would spend years trying to process what that separation cost him. And decades later, when he built his own academy in Latvia, the first thing he said was, "No child should have to make that choice." But that comes later. In Munich, the boy from Riga found himself on the same courts as a 14-year-old Serbian who trained like a soldier, regimentally, obsessively, with a discipline that looked almost inhuman to the other boys. His name was Novak Djokovic. 2 boys, same courts, same coaches, same hours, different hungers. According to those who were there, they didn't exactly get along. They gave each other trouble. They fought, broke rackets, pushed each other to the edge in sessions that stretched 6, 7, 8 hours. The tension between them wasn't hatred. It was something more complicated than that. It was the collision of 2 completely opposite relationships with the same sport. Djokovic needed tennis the way a drowning man needs air. Gulbis looked at tennis and saw a hobby that had gotten slightly out of hand. And that difference, that invisible, impossible to measure difference in hunger, would become the defining wound of Ernests Gulbis's entire career. But here's what nobody knew, what he himself barely understood. The hunger wasn't the real problem. By 15, Gulbis skipped junior tennis entirely and turned professional. His coach, Gunther Bresnik, the man who would later train Dominic Thiem, described him in terms that bordered on reverence. Bresnik called Gulbis the most physically gifted player he had ever worked with. Not one of the best, the best. A serve cracking at 220 kilometers per hour. A backhand carved from stone. Drop shots with the touch of a surgeon. The circuit took notice immediately. Here was a player who could dismantle anyone on any surface on any given day. The problem was the day after. Gulbis himself described his relationship with preparation with an honesty that was almost comical. While Djokovic spent every free hour stretching, recovering, optimizing, Gulbis ate Nutella and played PlayStation. While rivals studied their opponents, he read novels. While others slept early, he stayed up, thinking, wandering, being, in his own words, an idiot. He once broke a handcrafted racket in a moment of fury, and immediately felt shame. Not because of the tantrum, because he knew the effort someone had put into making that racket, and he'd destroyed it in 3 seconds of self-indulgence. That was Gulbis, capable of profound self-awareness, incapable of using it to change. In 2008, at 19 years old, he reached the quarterfinals of Roland Garros. The opponent waiting across the net? His old sparring partner from Munich. Djokovic won, cleanly, convincingly, and kept winning. And kept winning. Meanwhile, Gulbis was building a different kind of reputation. He told journalists that Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic were boring, that their press conferences were exercises in diplomatic emptiness, polished, safe, bloodless. He said he didn't like Djokovic much, that since his first big success, something in his eyes had changed. He said tennis should be like boxing, brutal, honest, raw, where the winner could look the loser in the eye and say, "I was better. Go home." The journalists loved him for it. The circuit tolerated him. The fans didn't quite know what to make of him. The label arrived eventually, as labels always do. The Lord. Aristocratic, arrogant, unbothered. It was a brilliant mask, and it was the only thing standing between him and the truth. October 2009, Stockholm, Sweden. Gulbis is arrested. The charge? Suspicion of soliciting prostitution. He spends a night in a Swedish jail cell, pays a fine of roughly 300 euros, and is released in time to play his match at the local tournament. His reaction to the whole episode? He called it very funny. The circuit shook its head again. Of course, the Lord. But look closer at that moment. A man who treats a night in jail as an amusing inconvenience. A man for whom a 300 euro fine is a rounding error. A man who walks back onto the court the next day as if nothing happened. This is not indifference. This is a man who has built an impenetrable wall between himself and consequences. A man who has decided, consciously or not, that nothing outside the court can touch him, because something inside the court already was. April 2010, Rome, the Foro Italico. Gulbis walks on court to face Roger Federer, the #1 player in the world. The cleanest, most efficient champion the sport had ever produced. What happened in the next 2 hours was one of the most brutal and strangest performances in modern tennis. Gulbis had 6 match points, 6 chances to close it out. He didn't take a single one. The crowd was watching a man at war with himself. From the outside, it looked like nerves or arrogance. It looked like the Lord throwing it away. He finally won. But the victory almost seemed accidental, like his body had made a decision his mind had refused to authorize. In Wimbledon 2014, a journalist asked Gulbis about the umpires. Gulbis heard vampires. Without missing a beat, he launched into a full philosophical monologue about how the enormous teams surrounding elite players, the physiotherapists, the psychologists, the agents, the managers, were vampires. Creatures that fed on the athlete's energy. That drained the sport of its rawness and replaced it with bureaucracy. The journalist stared at him. Gulbis was completely serious, and he wasn't entirely wrong. It was the same year he reached the greatest height of his career, Roland Garros 2014. He beats Federer, then beats Tomas Berdych, reaches the semifinals of a Grand Slam for the first and only time in his life. June 9th, 2014, Ernests Gulbis enters the ATP Top 10. And on the night that most athletes would have spent studying their next opponent, planning recovery, protecting what they'd built, Gulbis reportedly took the $500,000 he'd just earned and lost most of it at a blackjack table in Latvia. $500,000 gone in one night. The circuit shook its head. Of course, the Lord. But here's the question nobody thought to ask. What does a man do with $500,000 when the money was never the point? What does he do when the victory doesn't fill anything? When the roar of 60,000 people fades and there's nothing left but the silence of a hotel room and a man who still doesn't understand why he plays? He bets it away. Because at least at the blackjack table, the stakes feel real. At least there, when you lose, you feel it. In August 2015, Gunther Bresnik called him. Bresnik was leaving. He had a new player, a younger player, a player who, according to Bresnik, actually worked. His name was Dominic Thiem. The man the world called lazy had just been publicly replaced by the man the world would celebrate for his work ethic. It's easy to call it what it looked like. But some men carry wounds that leave no visible marks. After Brezhnev left, the descent was swift and pitiless, from the top 10 to outside the top 100, then outside the top 200, then the top 500, then beyond counting. The shoulder injuries he refused to operate on. He believed he could outrun the damage through sheer stubbornness. He was wrong. The forehand he rebuilt and rebuilt again, searching for a technical solution to what was never a technical problem. He tried to reinvent his most fundamental stroke multiple times. New grip, new swing path, new mechanics. Each attempt a confession that something wasn't working. Each attempt a refusal to name what that something actually was. A man searching for the answer in his technique when the answer lived in his nervous system. He described the end of his career with 3 words: Court 18. The hidden court. The graveyard of men the tournaments no longer needed. He said he felt treated like garbage by the same tournaments that had once celebrated him. The same organizations that had put him on center court, that had built promotional campaigns around his name, that had loved the controversy he generated, now relegated him to courts with no cameras, no crowds, no meaning. He compared the circuit to a lion hunt. You don't need to be faster than the lion, he said. You just need to be faster than the last man. And eventually, he was the last man. And then, December 2024. His father, Ernests Gulbis, the billionaire, the architect of the family's fortune, the man who had built an empire from nothing in the economic chaos of post-Soviet Latvia, the financial and emotional anchor of Ernest's entire career, died unexpectedly. In Brazil, far from home, the protection was gone. The last layer of the aristocratic armor, the knowledge that whatever happened on the court, there was always money, always a safety net, always a father, was gone. For the first time in his life, Ernests Gulbis was fully exposed. And it was in the months that followed that he finally spoke. In 2026, he told the truth. Not the truth the circuit wanted, the story of the wasted talent, the silk pajamas, the blackjack tables, the man who had everything and chose nothing. The real truth. That even when he was in peak physical condition, when his body was ready, when the strokes were there, when everything was aligned, the moment the pressure climbed, something would break. Not the serve, not the footwork, not the tactics. His ears would block, as if the world had gone silent around him. His hands would start to shake. His legs would cramp, not from fatigue, not from lack of preparation, but from pure, uncontrollable panic. In 20 minutes, he'd spent years trying to manage it in silence. Superstitions. Spitting 3 times over his left shoulder when a dark thought arrived. An old Russian ritual to chase away bad luck. Breathing exercises he'd learned from people around him. Fragments of Buddhism he'd collected from books in hotel rooms at 2 in the morning. A man of profound intellect, a reader of Dostoevsky and Murakami, a student of art history, a boy named after Hemingway. Trying to defeat a biological terror with ancient rituals and breathing techniques because admitting the real problem was unthinkable. For 20 years, the world had watched this happen and drawn its conclusion. The Lord doesn't care. The Lord is lazy. The Lord is wasting everything. The Lord was having a panic attack, and he'd chosen to carry it alone. Because in his world, in the world of the silk pajamas, the billionaire father, the aristocratic armor, admitting fear was more humiliating than losing. Because the mask had become the only protection he knew. How many men do you know who have carried a secret for decades? Not because they were cowards, but because the truth felt more dangerous than the lie. In February 2024, Ernests Gulbis announced his retirement from professional tennis. No ceremony, no press conference, a single Instagram post, direct, unadorned, exactly how he'd always wanted to speak. No diplomatic emptiness, no rehearsed gratitude, just the fact, stated plainly, and a door closing quietly behind him. He'd already begun building something different. In September 2022, he had assumed the presidency of the Latvian Tennis Union. He wanted to fix what he saw as broken, the system that forced children to leave their families, their language, their roots, to chase a dream in foreign academies. He lasted until August 2025, when he resigned to avoid a conflict of interest. He had decided to build his own academy. Not for champions, for kids. For the 12-year-old version of himself, the boy who arrived in Munich alone, in a foreign language, without his mother, without his grandfather, without the theater and the books and the warmth of the world he'd known. The boy who learned to perform toughness because vulnerability wasn't an option. He married. He became a father of 2. The man who once said he'd never let a woman believe she was his girlfriend. Who projected the image of the untouchable aristocrat to anyone who got too close. Had found something the circuit never gave him: stillness. He reads, he studies art, he teaches. He is, in the end, exactly what he always was. A man too complicated for a simple story. The tennis world spent 20 years calling him lazy. They were watching a man fight a war no one else could see. He never won a Grand Slam. He never fulfilled what Brezhnev believed he was capable of. He never became the rival that Djokovic's career deserved. But somewhere in Latvia, there are children learning tennis on courts that didn't exist before he built them. Children who will never have to choose between their family and their dream at 12 years old. And somewhere in that same country, a man named after Hemingway finally stopped performing. Finally stopped spitting over his shoulder and hoping the darkness would pass. Finally told the truth. Maybe that's not the legacy anyone expected from the Lord. Maybe it's the only one that was ever really his. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment below. Tell us which athlete you want to see next.